Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 14, Episode 154. I am Dave Bryan from SteelersDepot.com. A little bit of surprise with me doing the intro today on this Tuesday. Obviously haven't done it in a while. Normally that job goes to Alex Kozora. Alex Kozora has the day off today with training camp right around the corner. And, you know, we try to get him to take as much time as possible with not much going on with the Steelers and with the NFL world right now. Figured today probably be as good a day as any to get Alex away from the site and away from the podcast, especially with training camp on the horizon and him going to be making that daily jaunt out to Latrobe, if you will, to cover the training camp practices. So, sitting in for Alex today, two voices that hopefully you've heard quite a bit as of late. They are the host of the new Depot Dive podcast. They are longtime kind of contributors of the site, SteelersDepot.com. I am, of course, talking about Joe Clark and Ross McCorkle. Boys, welcome to the Terrible Podcast today, sitting in for Alex. I certainly do appreciate you doing so. Happy Tuesday to the both of you.
Yeah, happy Tuesday, Dave. Excited to be here. Looking forward to the show.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having us. And yeah, as you mentioned, we do hope you guys have been tuning into the Depot Dive every Thursday, and pretty soon we'll have more to talk about. Training camp starting here shortly.
All right, you guys don't have to be so buttoned up with me. I'm not going to let you. I'm, you know how I am. I run things kind of loose around here. Let's sort of reintroduce. For those people that maybe don't listen to the Depot Dive, maybe aren't as overly familiar with. Because I mean, look, both of you have been on the show before, so they probably heard you. But Joe, let's start with you real quick. How long have you been with SteelersDepot.com? How the hell did I find you? And let's see, what else is there? Where do you live? And and how did you become a Steelers fan? Because you're in Boston.
Yeah, so I started with Depot. It was August 2021 because it was my senior year of college. Alex put out a tweet looking for people to do game recaps. I had written for the Xavier newspaper. I was the editor. I'd written countless game recaps for basketball. I did it for football in high school, so I figured why not apply? I'd been a huge fan of the site pretty much since middle school, especially in high school. So reached out to him, ended up doing game recaps for a season. You guys brought me back in, I think, towards the end of May, like right before the draft. Worked part-time from May until July, and then that training camp, Kenny Pickett's rookie season. So this is going to be my third season working full-time. So I became a Steelers fan. My dad grew up between Massachusetts and New Jersey, and it was during the 70s when the Steelers were really good. So I kind of just latched on. I just became a Steelers fan, and I grew up literally 15 minutes from Gillette Stadium, probably honestly a little bit closer. And so obviously the Patriots 6 Super Bowls when I was growing up, caught a lot of flack for being a Steelers fan, but never regret it for a second. Still can't stand the Patriots to this day. So, this is honestly my dream job. I never really thought I would. I mean, I wrote a lot growing up, but just never really thought that there would be, opportunity for it. And then it kind of just blossomed from just working on recaps to going full time in a couple of months. So it's been pretty awesome.
Kind of took off fast, didn't it? We went from had you doing game recaps, I think, for a season, and turn around and boom, you're sitting in a full-time chair there. So, all right, Ross, you've actually, I think, kind of been associated with the site a little bit longer than Joe has, but give the same spiel. How did we ended up connecting with you? How that progress has gone? You're actually in Nashville by way of, I think, Seattle area. Live in Nashville now. How did you become a Steelers fan with that route?
Yeah, so as far as my Steelers fandom, I was born in Pittsburgh, so I was there for the first 6 years of my life, and then we moved to Cincinnati, and then moved back to Pittsburgh for a few years. So I still have a lot of family in the area. I think I was born at St. Francis Hospital there, which no longer exists, but I'm sure some of you listening will know what I'm talking about. But yeah, it's still following the Steelers is kind of my way to stay connected to where I was from and stay connected to my family and stuff like that. So I've been a fan for as long as I can remember and kind of raised that way. But actually, when I moved to Seattle, it was just a week or so before the Steelers and the Seahawks played in the Super Bowl. But back there in 2005 season. So yeah, I was the kid in school wearing my Steelers gear. People did not take kindly to it. Obviously, there was some controversies in that game with the officiating, or at least that's the narrative that Seattle fans ran with. But yeah, as far as my experience here on the site, joined in January of 2020. I had actually reached out to you I guess through the Terrible Podcast email, just because I'd been a listener for a while. And I just said, hey, I have a little bit of experience. I had written for another site briefly in college and just said, hey, if you guys are ever looking for help, I'm interested in getting involved. And I think it was a full 2 years later that you messaged me out of the blue on Twitter and asked, hey, are you still interested? And I was like, yeah, I sure am. So I joined in a very part-time role at that point, started doing some kind of video recaps, just recapping news on the site a few times a week. And my role has grown from there, started doing the game recaps, or not the game recaps rather, but the live game blogs, pulling in, interesting tweets and all that about the game on game day. And from there, I think it was last November. So coming up, I guess getting close to a full year of full time with you guys, and have been loving it. So,
and before that, you was with what, Uber Eats or Uber?
Yeah, yep. I was with Uber Corporate and working the Southeast region, working with restaurants.
All right. Let's see here. Where do I want to go with this? For those that don't know, this past February, right after the Super Bowl, I did a jaunt back home to Pensacola to visit a few people, and then I went from there. I went to Nashville to spend a couple of days with Ross, and then I went from Nashville up to Boston to spend some time with Joe and his family to get to know both these guys and spend some time with them. I got to know now. This is really unfiltered. I'm going off the cuff here. Ross, what was one thing that let's say your wife said after meeting me that was either flattering or non-flattering? Was she surprised about how good looking of a guy I was, or what's one takeaway that maybe either your wife or immediate family had about me after meeting me?
No, she was definitely.
Go ahead, hurt my feelings if you must.
No, she was enamored with the locks. I think the long hair was definitely a hit. I think you had it up. You put it up a couple times when it was going out to dinner or maybe a fancier occasion, and then you'd let it down. And yeah, you got some hair on you. And I'm only 29 years old and lost my hair a couple years ago, so I'm a little jealous of that. But no, I think she had heard your voice just, from me listening to the podcast. And so to put a face to the voice was fun for, I think, both of us.
At least you didn't say I look like a catcher's mitt with long hair. All right, Joe, I spent quite a bit of time with your mom and dad. Your dad really enjoyed your dad's a character for sure. Had some great conversations with both of them. What was a takeaway from one or both of your folks there when I was in Boston?
Oh, my mom was just impressed with just the breadth of just the random Steelers that you could recall. We were talking about some of that, and just in general, I mean, they love being around you. We had a great time on that food tour. They just had a great time talking to you. So it was a really good experience. And then I really enjoyed our Fenway Park tour. I thought that was a lot of fun as well.
I enjoyed that as well too. I was glad to get get to spend time with both you guys there. All right, what do you suppose Alex is doing today? Is he playing that college football 25?
I bet he is. I'd say that's a safe bet.
And Joe, you have that. How is it?
That was good. I spent some time with it last night. Did a couple play now games just to get a feel for some of the new mechanics, and did sort of like a test dynasty to get used to the new recruiting and all that sort of stuff. So still kind of in the midst of that. I'm sure I'll get around to it at some point later today just to keep work on it. And then once, everything's fine-tuned with the sliders, I'll deep dive into rebuilding one of those one-star programs.
All right, good deal there. Let's see. I'm not going to have time to delve into that game at all. I haven't played video games, I don't think, since Atari was a thing. It just had to work. It just I used to be full bore into video gaming back as a kid, but obviously I haven't had a time for it since. Oh, by the way, this is a Steelers podcast, so I think we should probably talk a little bit about the Steelers, and really the only kind of real hard news that has happened since the Friday Terrible podcast was on Monday. The Steelers announced that they will hold a joint practice with the Buffalo Bills on Thursday, August the 15th, and that will happen at Acrisure Stadium. I think at first we were maybe under the impression that would happen out at St. Vincent College in Latrobe. No, it will happen at Acrisure Stadium on August 15th from 2 to 4. The joint practice, however, is closed to the public, so only credentialed media members will have access to that. And it's been a long time since the Steelers have had any kind of joint practice with another team. Obviously this will happen a couple of days before the Steelers play the Bills on Saturday, August 17th at Acrisure. Once again, only a 2-hour practice. How do you suppose, whichever one wants to jump in first, how do you suppose, do you like this, and do you think we'll see more of this moving forward? And what's your overarching thoughts, both of you, on this?
Yeah, I think they used to hold them all the time, and it's been quite a bit. The last one was the Lions several years back, and I think there have been a couple of tensions are always running high at training camp in the heat and everything, and so fights and stuff like that would occasionally break out, which were fun to track along. But I think the most interesting thing is, and I think Matthew Marksy or maybe Alex wrote about it this morning, but Chase Claypool will be returning to town, which will be kind of fun. And Mitch Trubisky, obviously, he returned to the Bills to back up Josh Allen there, so he'll be returning. I'm sure Trubisky's going to look at the offense and be like, where was this when I was there? Because you're looking at, the multiple new offensive linemen who are, more talented, and you've got obviously the quarterback room's totally overhauled. So it's going to be a new look, but it'll be fun to watch. I don't know how much they'll really get into things a couple days before the game, probably more of a walkthrough. But yeah, it should be a fun thing to track along.
I do wonder how much team aspect they'll do, if this mostly be kind of drill driven, 1-on-1s, 2-on-2s, or something like that. But Joe, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm intrigued by the timing of it, just being 2 days before a game. How much, can we get out of it? And yeah, it's been since 2016 since they've had a joint practice. Of course, 2016 was the last time they won a playoff game. I don't think there's any correlation, but just something that popped into my head. One thing I do think, though, that is interesting is I don't think there was a fight in training camp last year within the Steelers. There wasn't anything, and it was Omar Khan last year said the reason they don't do joint practices is, they like the physicality of their own practices. I do think it's interesting, I'm not advocate for fighting, but get the blood boiling, get the tensions running every now and then isn't the worst thing. So now you're bringing an opponent with the Bills. There's some controversy in that playoff game last year. They hit on Joey Porter Jr., just the general frustration of, the Bills kind of didn't really kick their ass, but they got 21-0 before the Steelers came back a little bit. So, maybe it's a convenient choice in opponent to maybe get a little tension, get a little fire in their belly in a joint practice, even though it's probably not going to be all that labor intensive 2 days before a game. So that's definitely something I think is a little bit interesting, given last year was kind of a kumbaya camp without any really injured squad fights last season.
Let's see. This happening on the 15th. The Steelers, I guess, technically break camp at Latrobe on that Wednesday, the 14th. So probably no surprise that they're going from there over to Acrisure Stadium to have that practice on Thursday. And then I would imagine probably have off on Friday and then the game on Saturday. And yeah, we'll be midway through August at that point. So quite a few practices will have happened for both teams by the time that thing gets underway. So that seems to be the biggest news as of the Friday show there. I pointed this out and sent this link to all the guys, and it's made its way around Twitter. There was a post that was released to the internet I think on Monday by Sean Syed, I think is how you pronounce his last name. He writes for summersports.com. He did a phenomenal job. The post is entitled "The New NFL Kickoff: Breaking Down a Season of the XFL Kickoffs to See What We Should Expect." And he went through and he watched and charted and broke down 400 plus XFL kickoffs to see what the the NFL's new kickoff rule will kind of look like and what he learned. Man, what a fabulous post! I was reading it. And it's a long post too. The more I read it, I thought, man, I'm embarrassed that we didn't do something like this. Now, we obviously would have taken a lot of time. You would have had to get through all the games, and I think he's got a lot of the all 22 maybe from this as well too. But just a phenomenal job of looking at really how teams will line up, or how he expects teams to line up with this new kickoff rule. Some of the schemes, or all the schemes that he noticed within this. He has names for all the schemes. He has stats related to all the schemes. And we've kind of talked about this, Alex and I, about how a lot of this where he's going to look like some running plays once this thing gets underway here. And he's even got them broken down by pull, by trap, by double, by power scheme. I think it's just a phenomenal job. And look, I am old school. I like traditional stuff. I don't like change. I think I've conveyed that to Alex, throughout this and the change of the kickoff rule. But I've got to admit, even I mean, because this has become such a boring play overall in the NFL when talking about the kickoff, I'm really excited about this. What kind of takeaways do you guys have by just merely reading this post and reading this post alone?
Yeah, the biggest one for me is just how far and away, the pull method was so much more effective than almost any other blocking scheme. It was the second most used besides, just lining up head on and blocking. But the average ball spot for a pull, which was basically, it was like the third defender to the left would pull over and take the furthest defender, or the third defender to the blocking to the left would take or offensive guy would take the L3 base, or the L1 on the right, so the furthest guy over on that side of the field. The average ball spot for that was 34.2, which was almost 5 yards higher than the next highest method, which was the double team, which was 29.3. And if that, becomes a scheme that the NFL teams can successfully implement and they start getting the ball beyond, the 30-yard line consistently, I think we're going to see maybe the kickoff becomes a boring play again and Mike Florio speculated the same thing, that if teams are consistently struggling or allow a couple big plays, they may just say, hey, we'll just kick it out of the back of the end zone and take it out in 30 instead of risking, giving up big yardage if teams can kind of come up with schemes that work fairly consistently. So that's kind of my worry with this new rule, is that teams are going to be really good at it early in the season, and it's just going to become by mid-season, hey, we're just going to kick it out the back of the end zone. But like you said, the study was really, really well done. A ton of info, really visually appealing too, with all the graphics kind of broke it down for you really well. So definitely something worth checking out. But yeah, I was really shocked by just how much better kind of the pull blocking method was on these kickoffs than really anything else.
Ross, what was your takeaway after plowing through this?
Yeah, I think one of the more interesting things to me is the number of tackles that the kickers are making, which is going to be interesting. You know, we watched, what was it? Sean Swisham injure himself in a preseason game, I think, several years back.
Hall of Fame game, yeah.
Hall of Fame game, yeah. So, that's a little concerning to me just because the kicker is a little bit closer up to the action and it seems to be making more tackles. It looked like this guy charted 14 total tackles for kickers, which was about a little bit less than half of what most of the other alignment positions were getting. But that is a significant amount of tackles for the kicker. I think there was one team, I can't remember who, but they were experimenting with using a different kicker for these kickoffs for that reason. I don't know if one of you know which team that
wasn't
was.
It the Chiefs? Wasn't the Chiefs playing with something like that?
Yeah, the Chiefs have one of their safeties and that rugby running back that they signed were both working on taking kickoffs, and they said they might use, I think it was Justin Reed, might be the guy they use as their kickoff starter to kind of try to, if he has to make some plays.
Let's see. What else there was, he labeled one play in 2023 as a trick play, and it was a throwback. I would have bet that there would have been more than that, but he only had one trick play that included a throwback. And obviously, I bring this up because of all the talk about, will we or won't we even see Justin Fields back there? And I think the large assumption and narrative is that was just Jaylen Warren just having a little fun in that situation when talking to Cameron Hayward, and that no way in hell will we see Justin Fields back there. I still can't help but think in the back of my mind that maybe at least just once, during the season, maybe for whatever reason, just late in game, just need a spark or something that maybe we'll see Justin Fields back there. I wouldn't bet my house on something like that happening, but I think the main takeaway here, overall, at least with the breakdown that Sean has done here on this post, not a lot of trick plays, one, and for as many kickoffs that they had and all like that, will we see more than that in the NFL? I bet we see something. I don't know, maybe a double reverse or something like that. But I think expectations overall as they kind of fill this thing out, especially at the top of the season, is there's not going to be a lot of trickeration involved.
Yeah, I kind of wonder. I feel like there'll be at least, maybe 2-3 teams that do make use of some of this, trick plays a little bit more than we saw in the XFL here. I mean, it's such a new thing overall, and I think a team that can execute this properly, I mean, it can make a huge difference on, their win-loss record for the whole season. If they're able to start with the ball consistently at the 40 or 45, or even get some scores out of this. I mean, kickoff's been a play that's just been kind of a nothing burger for many years now, and so if a team can start to rip off some of these big plays, and teams aren't necessarily prepared for all the types of trickeration that can happen on these, I do think that there'll be at least a couple of teams that push the boundaries, push the envelope with what can happen on these.
Joe, any final thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, just going back to the trick plays, the one thing that I think why they were so small is that you really just have no margin for error with how close the defenders are. One guy slips a block, and if you're doing a long developing trick play like a throwback or even some sort of reverse, all it takes is, one or two guys beating their blocks, and you're starting, maybe behind the 20 instead of, maybe at like the 35 or something. So that's kind of a reason why. And obviously I think in the NFL, they'll try it because they are more skilled and a little bit quicker, than some of these guys maybe in the XFL. But I just think that it is a very risky play, given that you can just field it normally and try to hold your block and get out beyond the 30. But a trick play, you just have that real limited margin for error for something to go wrong. It's kind of, it's high risk, high reward. But I think sometimes the risk might outweigh the reward given the alternative.
All right, and once again, that's a extremely excellent post. You can find it. Let's see, SUMER sports.com, summersports.com, only without the two M's in it. Should be able to find that quite easily. It really is a good read. A lot of videos on there, a lot of data charting and all like that. So if you get a chance, make sure to swing by and read that. Let's see, where else should we go from here? With training camp now about to get underway, and this will probably be the last time I think we'll have you guys on here before camp actually gets underway. Wanted to get your thoughts, both your guys' thoughts on maybe the most concerning thing on the overall concerning thing about the Steelers heading into training camp, and then broken down by both offensive and defensively, maybe the most concerning thing about this team, or thing, maybe the thing that you're most wanting to find out the most about this team once training camp. Because look, we've written about it. We know all the players. Well, I've gone through and doing the 90 and 30 series to try to get, present as good of a grasp as possible on this entire roster. There's obviously been a lot of speculation throughout the offseason about things, but look, training camp, we're going to learn a lot more about this team once training camp gets underway. Joe, I'll start with you. What is your single most concerning aspect about this team, or thing that you want to find out the most about this team ahead of training camp getting underway?
Yeah, I think right now the most concerning thing is really just kind of the unknown at quarterback. I mean, I think we all kind of assume that Russell Wilson will be the starter, and even him and Fields, I think we can kind of agree are upgrades right now over what the Steelers have from Kenny Pickett. But given, what their schedule is this season, the question is going to be just how much of an upgrade can they be? Wilson's obviously more accurate. He's a veteran. He's going into an Arthur Smith offense that, should work in his favor, and he succeeded with a good defense, strong run game, which the Steelers should have. But, he did last season, I think he was a little bit better, but 2 seasons ago, he really did struggle. So I think kind of just the unknown of, can this quarterback play elevate the offense enough to make the Steelers a threat to, really win a postseason game, which is kind of what I think we expect right now, but is that actually going to happen? So that's right now is my biggest concern is, what if Wilson ends up falling flat and it doesn't work out? I mean, obviously you look to at the receiver position, not having, a clear-cut number 2. They have a couple guys that could potentially serve in that role, and Pat Freiermuth, as it stands right now, is probably going to be, their second most productive pass catcher, but that also doesn't, assuage any fears that, maybe Wilson isn't going to be this huge upgrade that can kind of take that offense to the next level. So that right now would probably be the thing that scares me the most is we head into training camp when, we haven't seen them a lot, but I think we'll have a pretty good grasp, at least, by probably the middle of camp, and certainly, around the preseason and heading into week 1.
All right, so that's obviously an offensive side of the ball would be your main concern there in the quarterback position. If forced to choose something on a defensive side of football, what would it be?
I would go with the defensive line depth. Larry Ogunjobi, I think, had a pretty disappointing year last season. I mean, we've heard positive things so far about DeMarvin Leal, how he showed up in OTAs and he's in better shape. But he's really got to show it again on the field here in training camp, him and Isaiah Loudermilk. How much can you really trust one of those guys to step up if, Ogunjobi has another disappointing season, and if you can trust him to step up at all? I know you have Logan Lee as an option too, and Dean Lowry. Out of those guys, you're not necessarily going to get a ton of pass rush juice, especially for Lee as a rookie. And Lowry hasn't been, necessarily a great pass rusher his whole career. He's great against the run. But, there's a little bit of a concern there that, if he doesn't step up, or even if Cameron Hayward might be a step slow coming off the injuries, that the depth isn't going to be enough, and that the defensive line could end up being a little bit of an issue for the Steelers this season. And obviously it's a position that they know they have to address early going forward. But given what they have this season, if 1 or 2 guys struggle, they could find themselves in a pretty tough spot.
All right, Ross, same set of questions to you. Your overarching, maybe biggest concern or thing that you're hoping to learn the most on either side of the ball ahead of training camp getting underway?
Yeah, on offense, I think, the easy answer is obviously the receiver depth after George Pickens, but have subscribed to the theory that, the tight end play can really, or specifically Pat Freiermuth, can kind of alleviate the wide receiver 2 concerns if he has the type of season that we think he can have. So my biggest concern is actually with the tight end room. I think the tight end room has a lot of different skill sets and is pretty strong as it stands now, but Pat Freiermuth hasn't been able to stay healthy throughout his career. If he goes down, I mean, you're looking at that being a large issue, especially in an offense that, Arthur Smith loves to use 2 or 3 tight ends on the field at a time. And so if Pat Freiermuth goes down, he's kind of the main receiving option. I mean, Darnell Washington was more of a blocker last year. Maybe he'll progress a little bit as a receiver, but some of the reports from spring practices didn't seem to indicate that he had made a huge leap in that area. Connor Hayward offers a little bit, and then Rodney Williams and I'm blanking on Falcons.
Oh, Michael Pruitt.
Michael Pruitt, yeah. But between those, I mean, if Freiermuth goes down, you're talking about, okay, yeah, now the wide receiver 2 issue is a big deal. And obviously right now they don't know who that wide receiver 2 is. So the tight end room and kind of the depth there does concern me a bit, given how much it's supposed to be featured in this offense. And now moving over to the defensive side of things, slot corner, I mean, obviously with Cam Sutton being suspended for a while, but I think outside corner depth concerns me a little bit more than the slot corner situation at the moment. Obviously, once Sutton returns, if something happens to Porter or Dante Jackson, you're probably talking about Sutton maybe moving outside and using one of the other guys inside. And by that point in the season, somebody, either whether it be Beanie Bishop or whether it be Josiah Scott or somebody else, 8 games of experience in the slot, and you can kind of, get by with moving Cam Sutton back outside. But if it happens over the first 8 games and they have to start somebody else on the outside, you're talking about, Corey Trice Jr., who has 0 NFL snaps to his name. He got injured, the first padded practice last year, or Darius, who has 39 defensive snaps to his name. And so you could be talking about a big issue at outside corner if somebody gets injured, throughout those first 8 games specifically.
All right, fair enough. Let's see here. Move along. Talking about. Let's see. What else did I want to talk about in here? Oh yeah. A camp dark horse on both sides of the football, and by that I mean a player that most people probably won't have making the 53-man roster, but just might. So we're talking about, kind of, I'm not expecting it to be a long point to the outfield or anything like that, but name me a player on both sides of the football that many would consider a camp dark horse before camp gets underway, that most won't have making the 53-man roster, but you think just might. And I'll start with Ross on this one.
Yeah, I think on defense, kind of getting back to my last point there about the secondary and depth on the outside, I think Anthony Averett, the former Raven, and he tried out there at rookie minicamp as a veteran, made the roster, got added to the roster shortly thereafter. I think he's a guy that could surprise and make the roster simply because of what I was just talking about with the outside corner depth. He has 27 NFL starts to his name. He's got 3 interceptions. He's got, 23 total passes defensed. And really the season that he played the most, which was 2021, his last season with the Ravens, he started 14 games. His next highest season was only 6 games, but the season that he actually got to play a bunch and kind of get in the rhythm, he had a pretty, decent year. It wasn't great, but it was decent. 3 interceptions and 11 total passes defensed, in 14 starts. And so I think he is definitely somebody that could surprise and earn one of those jobs. I know a lot of the conversations kind of been centered around Darius Rush and Corey Trice Jr. being in, competition for that top outside depth spot. But I think Anthony Averett probably deserves more of a look than he's getting. And certainly with Cam Sutton out, I think he has a good shot at making the roster. And I think I've from what I've seen, a lot of people have been leaving him off their initial 53. So he's my choice on defense. For offense, I think for me, and this one maybe isn't as significant, but Rodney Williams, I think, has a better chance than many are giving him credit for over a guy like Michael Pruitt. I know Pruitt has his experience with Arthur Smith in Atlanta, and so he has that going for him, but he's also 32 or 33 years old. If they keep 4 tight ends, I know the Steelers have kept 3 the last couple of seasons, but Arthur Smith with the Falcons kept 4, and that's obviously a product of him using the tight ends a whole bunch. So the 4th guy, if they keep one, needs to be able to play special teams. I think Rodney proved that he could do that last year. He played quite a bit of special teams when he was suited up. I think Pruitt has trailed off in his special teams usage as he gets up there in age at 32 or 33. And so, I think Rodney Williams has a good shot at making the roster as that 4th tight end if they do keep one. Obviously, he'd have to probably prove he's at least comparable to Pruitt, but given the youth and given his special teams abilities, I think he has a good shot.
All right, Joe, both sides of the football, same set of questions there.
Yeah, I'll start on the offensive side of the ball. The Steelers haven't had a traditional fullback in, a number of years, and it's something that Arthur Smith has traditionally had in his offense. So I'm going to go with Jack Coletto. I know a couple weeks, months at this point, the days kind of just blend together. Ray Fittipaldo said that he's somebody that, could really surprise in training camp. The Steelers obviously liked him to keep him around. They signed him, I think, to the practice squad during the season last year. Never came up, but he stuck with the team this offseason. So he's kind of a guy that they've had their eye on even before Smith, who does like to use his fullbacks. So given that, if he has a good training camp, then maybe he has a role. Maybe the Steelers implement, the fullback a little bit more in their offense this season. So that's a guy that I kind of have my eye on as, potential, because that can kind of change the dynamic of their offense as well. Defensively, I'd go with David Perales. I think Jeremiah Moon's probably the favorite right now for that 4th outside linebacker job. But Perales, he said he dropped 15 pounds. He wants to have a bigger special teams role. It's going to be an uphill battle for him because Moon was good on special teams with Baltimore last season. But if he can kind of, if dropping that weight makes him a little quicker, getting around the edge, or if he improves his pass rush arsenal and can kind of compete with Moon and be a similar type of player on special teams, then he's definitely somebody that I think could be a dark horse for that 4th outside linebacker job. It's kind of, maybe a mishmash right now with, if Jacoby Windman there, you have Julius Welshoff, you have Moon with Perales, but I think Moon and Perales are probably the top 2 contenders as it stands right now, unless the team, goes outside the organization. So I think Perales and Moon could be, an underrated competition to watch for that 4th job. And then Coletto, if the team keeps a fullback, would be, somebody that could be really interesting in how that works in this offense.
Yeah, I would have never guessed that you would have picked Perales there. That's an interesting suggestion on your part there. It will be, look, I said even going way back to late last year when the Steelers claimed Jeremiah Moon off waivers, what a shrewd move that was. Now, look, he, for whatever reason, he might not end up making, the roster or what have you, but you don't have a lot invested in that overall because you turned around and was able to exclusive rights free agent tender him. And you knew going into the offseason that you needed, some more depth to add to that position group at outside linebacker, particularly somebody that has played some defensive snaps and somebody that has excelled on special teams. So I think Jeremiah Moon's going to be a tough out overall. I'm not saying that it can't happen. If anybody was to do it, you would have to include, I think, David Perales in that mix. And, I remember watching a little bit of Perales tape, a couple of years ago when he was drafted there, a high effort guy, did look a little bulky overall, looked like he could stand to to trim a little bit of weight. And it looks like he has done that. He's obviously got a full training camp and preseason underneath his belt at this time. So there's no reason to think that he shouldn't be able to hit the ground running in training camp this year. So that is an interesting selection on your part here. All right. You guys didn't know I was going to go this route ahead of the show here, but recently we've seen a lot of the odds makers come out and get a lot of these early over-under lines for stats for players ahead of training camps getting open. Bet Online is one of them that released a long list, I think about a week ago. Alex Kozora put a post on the site up on that. Wanted to go over a few of these with you guys and get your thoughts on the over and under numbers on some of these stats, and more importantly, why you are going to go the way that you're going to go on the over under. So let's start first and foremost with George Pickens. They have the over under on him at 1,000.5 yards. So, really 1,000 is kind of the cutoff number. I think most people looking at this right out of the chute would be inclined to think, man, take the over on him. But is it as much of a give me as most people would think? And then the over-under for receptions for George Pickens is 65.5. So I'll throw it to each of you guys. Are you taking the over or the under on 1,000.5 receiving yards for George Pickens, and over or under 65.5 receptions? Joe, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I would definitely take the over. I actually did take the over for at least the yards. I haven't taken it for the receptions yet. The reason being is he's the number one receiver in this offense. He's gonna have to be, more of a piece than he was last season. Last season he had games where he would kind of completely disappear. I think he had something like 7 games where he had under 40 receiving yards. And that just simply can't happen this season. He's not going to have. I know Deontay Johnson missed some time, but he came back, and it was the games where Johnson kind of put up his numbers, where Pickens would sort of disappear a little bit. There's really no number 2 that I think is going to be stealing a ton of targets from Pickens this year. But Freiermuth is going to have more this season. Obviously, he's going to be healthier, but Pickens is going to be the most targeted player on the team. He's going to see his volume of targets. I think he's going to be used, in some different roles to kind of help when teams try to blanket him. So I think for that reason, he might be more valuable underneath, might have more receptions. I think last year, the most receptions he had in a game was 7. I think we can see him, get 8, 9, 10 receptions here this year. And the yards, he had 1,200 plus yards last season. I could see him, going way. Me and Ross talked about this on the dive. I could see him, approaching second-team All-Pro numbers somewhere around 1,400 yards this season. So I'm personally just pretty high on Pickens. I don't think, him being that number 1 and kind of getting maybe more attention is going to be that much of a detriment to him, because I think Arthur Smith's going to find a way to use him a little bit creatively. Excuse me. And he's great in contested catch setting as well. So I would definitely go over on both of those.
All right, so you're hammering both the overs there. Ross, do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I would lean towards the over on both of those numbers. He had 63 receptions last year, so they're only asking for a couple of extra. I think that's 3.7 per game that he had last year. They're looking for 3.8 per game this year. And you, as a number 1 wide receiver, if he wants to prove, that he's had these aspirations to be a Pro Bowler, if he wants to prove that he is one of the top receivers in the league, and of course this is a contract year for him. He's still under contract next year, but the Steelers typically extend their guys, with a year remaining on their rookie deal. So this is a big season for him, a high expectations. He's got, probably the best quarterback or both quarterbacks that he's played with in his career. You're talking about a good run game. So you're talking about play action passing and, more of that happening under Arthur Smith and with Russell Wilson. And so I think it would be very reasonable to expect an average of 3.8 receptions per game for him. I would hope it's, even higher than that, hopefully about 4.5 a game, which would put him well above that over for receptions. And then, naturally, if he's getting more receptions there, You could probably expect his yards to follow. He had 1,140 last year. I think he could get up into the 1,250, 1,300 plus range, and certainly some more touchdowns to boot. And so I agree that the over is the most likely there.
All right, next one on the list, Jaylen Warren. I think Alex and I covered some of the over-unders a couple of weeks ago with Warren and Najee Harris. Seems like since then maybe Jaylen Warren's over-under has bumped up a little bit. Probably not surprising. Bet Online, at least the last time we looked, has Jaylen Warren at 600.5 rushing yards for 2024. Ross, we'll start with you. Is that a easy over to take there, or is there some question there?
Sorry, what was the number?
600.5
rushing
yards.
Only. Okay.
Rushing only.
Yeah, I would bet the over on that for sure. We saw his share of this, snaps and share of the carries go up from his first season to his second. He played 31% of the offensive snaps in 2022, and then he played 49% of the offensive snaps last year. His share of the carries didn't quite follow that, but it did increase. Najee Harris still had, a good chunk more carries than he did. But 784 yards last year on 149 attempts. Arthur Smith only figures to make this offense run more than it did. I'm actually high on Najee Harris. I think he probably will also see an increase, possibly have the best season of his career. But Jaylen Warren's been trending in the right direction. And that chart that I think I saw you retweet this morning or last night, showed him in the way top right of some stat study showing his forced missed tackles and his yards after contact. He is far and away the best in the league when it comes to putting those two stats together on a matrix there. And I think especially with this wide zone offense, and you're talking about maybe a little bit more east-west and kind of explosive runs, that's his wheelhouse. And so I think that's an easy over for him.
Anything to add, Joe? Are you hammering the over on that as well?
Yeah, no, this is my favorite time of the year to bet because I always find that the Steelers are so mispriced and you can make a lot of money betting on their over-under. So I agree with Ross. I mean, he went over about 180 yards last season. Nothing is going to indicate that his role is going to do anything except increase this season. So I would definitely go and hammer the over for pretty much all of the same reasons. Bigger role, better play calling, better offensive line, presumably. I think he's going to clear 600 pretty easily.
All right, Najee Harris, 850.5 rushing yards. Man, that feels low for a guy that's registered 3 1,000-yard rushing seasons in his first 3 years. Obviously, has yet to miss a game yet, and with the wear and tear, you do kind of wonder if just the odds of him missing maybe 1 or 2 might catch up with him this year. But even if he does, I mean, it feels like that's an easy bet as well too. Would both of you guys agree on the over?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, again, like you said, the injury concern is really the only reason why you'd be a little bit nervous in taking it. But I mean, that's what the risk you run by betting any of these over-unders with any of these guys. Somebody could blow at a knee or even tweak a hammy and miss 2 or 3 games and miss their number by a little bit. But given what Harris has done through the first 3 seasons and given what this offense should look like this year, I think he's primed for another 1,000+ yard season on the ground.
Anything to add to that one, Ross?
I just think the weight loss, and that's very interesting to me. I know we saw Le'Veon Bell cut some weight, and that paid off big dividends for him that following season. And I think Le'Veon Bell maybe even put out there some advice to Najee to lose some pounds. And so I think this is an easy over for him.
All right, maybe the more intriguing over-under, at least with Najee Harris, is the 6.5 rushing touchdowns. Which way are you guys leaning? Because I think there was a recent post or tweet that made the rounds talking about how Arthur Smith kind of his distribution of kind of the red zone carries and touchdowns during his time in Atlanta has kind of brought this a little bit more to the forefront. Ross, over under 6.5 rushing touchdowns for Najee Harris in 2024.
Yeah, that study you're referring to showed, a kind of a split between three different options. I don't know how much I believe that Cordero Patterson's going to be involved in this equation at his age, and he certainly was less involved last year with the Falcons under Arthur Smith. And so, if you're talking about just Najee and Jalen Warren kind of splitting that load in the red zone. Yeah, I think that is, I lean towards over on that. The only reason maybe not is I'm hoping that the Steelers can actually score from, through the air and maybe beyond just the red zone. I know they didn't have that many scores last year. I think near the bottom of the league in touchdowns that came from, beyond the red zone 20-yard line there. So I lean over, but I could see a world where he goes under on that.
At least you'd like to see more touchdowns from outside of the, let's say, 8-yard line, right? Or at least outside of 10. Maybe not. I mean, you obviously would like to see more from outside the red zone. But man, if this team could start punching it in from, the 11-yard line on a passing play or whatever, not be so reliant on those low red zone type carries. I mean, obviously you're going to have your share of those, you would think, during the season. Joe, which way are you leaning? I mean, is this another easy over in your eyes?
I'm gonna play a little bit of devil's advocate, and even though I think the over is probably the better bet, the reason why the under could be valuable is because I think it was probably a month ago, as Jeremy Fowler reported that the Steelers packages for Justin Fields would be inside the red zone, would be around the goal line, and Diana Rossini confirmed today that the Steelers are gonna have packages for Fields. So that's something that if the Steelers are gonna put Fields into the game, I don't know, inside the 15, inside the 10-yard line, I think a lot of it is going to be they want to have him use his legs. So he could possibly chew up some rushing touchdowns, taking away from, not just Harris, but Harris and Warren if they get him out on the move. So that's a little leery to me. I mean, Harris has gone over 6.5 every year in his career. So on paper, yeah, I think it's probably a good bet, but it's one I'm personally going to stay away from just because we kind of have that unknown factor of if the team's going to kind of use Fields in maybe the short red zone or just even as a passer, they could use him, keep defenses off track or off guard. So that's an interesting factor that I think kind of could play into this one a little bit.
All right, the next one's a little bit surprising as well, too. Even though he did have missed several games with the injuries last year, Pat Freiermuth, they have it over under 50.5 receptions, and this is a guy, at least from where we sit right now, I think most of us would agree. We expect to probably be the second leading receiver, at least in receptions, goes on this team in 2024. Joe, is this an easy hammer at over 50.5 receptions for Freiermuth?
Yeah, definitely. Like Harris, I think the only concern is injuries. He dealt with a hamstring last year. He has a history of concussions, but I mean, he had 60 receptions his rookie year, 63 his second year, and he's going to be in a much more featured role, I think, this season than he was either of those two seasons. So I think over 50 would be a very safe bet. And even last season, I mean, he was pretty much a non-factor. He still had 32 receptions in, 12 games, 9 starts. So I really would think that he's going to go over 50 games this season or 50 receptions this season.
Ross?
Yeah, if he could stay healthy, I'm not so sure he's going to, be able to do that. He missed a game apiece in his first 2 seasons. He missed 5 games last year. And I think some of those games were kind of half games where he exited early too. So, I lean towards over just because of all the reasons Joe said. I think, if he is healthy, he has a chance to be kind of a wide receiver 2 type production and have, 70 plus, 75 plus, 80 even receptions on the high end of things. But yeah, I am a little concerned about his injury and his health.
All right. The last one that we have is defensive player TJ Watt. And this is embarrassing to even say. I had to make sure it wasn't a misprint or something. 13.5 sacks is the over-under number on TJ Watt. We're talking about a guy that can get you 3 or 4 in a game and multiple times a year. To me, this screams hammer the over, right, Ross?
Yeah, I don't do sports betting, but you listing off some of these over-unders makes me want to give it a shot. Yeah, I think TJ Watt, that's a pretty easy over. I mean, I've written about the last couple of weeks that, a better offense can set up, guys like TJ Watt or any of the pass rushers really to have more opportunities to get after the quarterback. The Steelers spent the 7th most time in the league games last season. And, obviously when you're trailing, teams are more likely to run and try and possess the ball and protect their lead. And so if the Steelers can get off to a better start on offense and maybe try to protect their own leads, that sets TJ Watt up for some more pass rush opportunities. I also think that, the secondary maybe being improved. You're talking about Minkah Fitzpatrick being healthy and more effective. I think Deshaun Elliott is going to, provide probably the best strong safety play the Steelers have had in a little bit. And then Dante Jackson, I'm pretty high on him. Joey Porter Jr., the trend seems good on him. If the secondary can create, an extra quarter second, half second of time for TJ Watt and the pass rush to get home, then you're talking about, maybe some of these quarterback hits or pressures turning into sacks. And so I think there is a good chance that he goes over that, or there's a great chance he goes over that. I think there's even a good chance he could go, and put up another 20-plus sack season for the second time in his career.
Man, Joe, feels like something would have to happen, not positive, for TJ Watt to hit over 13.5 sacks, right?
Yeah, it would probably be some sort of disaster scenario for the Steelers if he comes in under that. So I really don't understand that line unless they're kind of accounting for an injury, because if he's healthy, I mean, he could have that by like week 9.
Right.
So
okay, let's go in one other direction here. We've talked quite a bit about, obviously expect George Pickens to have a big role receiving in this offense. He should lead the team in both yards and receptions. We've talked quite a bit about how Pat Freiermuth will likely be up there as far as an eligible goes in both receptions and receiving yards. I think it's pretty much an understood that probably both those running backs and Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren could potentially be number 3 and number 4, if not one of them, maybe number 2. I mean, Jaylen Warren's proven, both those guys have proven that they could catch this ball in the NFL. Obviously, the yards per catch might be a little bit lower than guys like Pickens and Freiermuth there. But throwing those 4 guys out, I want to kind of concentrate. It's more of along the lines of who will be the kind of the second leading wide receiver on the team. And man, you got a lot of guys that we're going to be monitoring here that probably shouldn't be considered roster locks at this point. You got Van Jefferson, you got Scotty Miller, you got Quez Watkins. Obviously, you think we know Roman Wilson's going to be on this roster. We think Calvin Austin is going to be on this roster. There's no reason to think that he won't be either. Who at the end of the 2024 regular season is the second leading wide receiver on this team in catches and yards? One of you jump in there.
Yeah, I think if Freiermuth plays, if we get a full 17 games out of Freiermuth, then I think he is a pretty strong candidate to take the crown in both of those for the second most receptions and the second most receiving yards on the roster. However, I could also definitely see a world in which Jaylen Warren ends up with that. I did a little study looking at, I know Jaylen Warren had said that the running backs are, very involved in the passing game in Arthur Smith's offense. I looked at the stats, and based on the Steelers for the last 2 years, the Broncos for the last 2 years, so with Russell Wilson, the Falcons for the last 2 years with Arthur Smith, and then also the Titans for the last 2 years, or sorry, not the last 2 years, but in 2019 and 2020 when they had Arthur Smith. Russell Wilson really likes throwing the ball to his running backs, especially over the last 2 seasons with the Broncos. He gave them 9.67 targets per game, compared to the Steelers the last 2 years, only 6.15. And Arthur Smith, for as much as Jaylen Warren talked that up, Arthur Smith, 5.53 targets per game for his running backs the last 2 years. And with the Titans, it was all the way down at 3.75. Maybe some of that had to do with Derrick Henry's, why throw him the ball, just hand it to him. He's gonna win. But Yeah, I think specifically the idea of Russell Wilson. He likes to extend the play with his legs. He likes to get outside the pocket and, maybe check down to his running backs and kind of play a little bit of backyard ball. And those running backs are really going to be, the most likely to be able to work back into his kind of field of view and receive those check down passes. And the stats bear it out with his time in the Broncos that the running backs are going to be getting a lot of targets. I think Najee Harris will even see a bump, even though he's been decreasing over his last, in each of his 3 years, he's seen a decrease in his targets and receptions. But I think Jaylen Warren specifically might be a huge, he might receive a bulk of that benefit with the running back receiving. And so I think Jaylen Warren has maybe a 49-51 shot with Pat Freiermuth edging him out slightly.
All right, I apologize. I probably didn't phrase that properly. I was more in the line of wanting you to point specifically to a wide receiver who would be the second leading wide receiver on the team. Because I look, I mean, you gave a great rundown there. I think all of us assumed that, maybe the top 4 pass catchers overall on this team will go, and Pickens, Freiermuth, and both the running backs in some order there. But drilling down to the wide receiver position specifically, who will be, when the season ends, the second leading wide receiver on the team in receptions and yardage?
Oh, that is a lot tougher, Dave.
Too long, didn't read.
yeah, right.
I'll get on you, boys. Alex, well, I'll get on you.
I think, yeah, that's tough. I think I'm pretty high on Calvin Austin III's chances of being that guy, kind of being the second best receiver on the team this year. His first year robbed of, through injury. And then second year, he started off the season with a little bit more usage and it kind of trailed off. There was reports that the Steelers were enamored with Allen Robinson's blocking skills, and that kind of, pushed Calvin Austin down the usage chart there a little bit. And I think, there's been a lot of excitement around Calvin Austin in the past, and it's just kind of faded. And I think last year in specific, the Steelers could barely support 2 receiving options, let alone get a third or fourth involved. And so Calvin Austin III just kind of fell out of the spotlight there. And I think this year could be the year. I mean, this is going to be his best opportunity maybe in his career to become a wide receiver too. So I think he could be that guy.
All right. He obviously only has 17 career receptions at this point during the regular season. What does that number look like in 2024 if he's going to be the second leading quote unquote wide receiver on the team?
Ooh, maybe something like 40 receptions in that neighborhood. 35, maybe 40 might be a lot for this offense. And we heard, what was it? Was it Arthur Smith or one of the coaches was talking about kind of more of a wide receiver 2 by committee type of thing at minicamp. And so I don't know if any wide receiver 2 is going to get more than, maybe 30 or 35 at the high end in receptions this year. So I could see him getting somewhere in that ballpark.
Joe, what about you? Where are you?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because if you look last year, the second leading, pure wide receiver on that Falcons roster had 18 receptions. It was running backs and tight ends. I think I'm going to go with Van Jefferson, though, because we've seen him kind of have a number 2-ish sort of season before in 2021 with the Rams. 50 catches, 802 yards, 6 scores. Last year in Atlanta, he was traded midseason, kind of jumped on a moving train while things were already underway. So not necessarily, it wasn't as if he, already had that full backing of what the offense was going to be. But now that he spent that time in Atlanta, he comes to Pittsburgh, kind of has that idea of Arthur Smith's offense, and he's had that production before. I don't think we're going to get anything like super great out of him. I know he said, I feel like I can be a 1,000-yard receiver in this offense. But I don't know, somewhere along the lines of 45, 50 receptions, 650-ish, somewhere around there. yards. I don't think that's completely out of the realm of possibility. So I would go with him as my number 2, and I do like Calvin Austin a lot. Just there's the unknown there. His lack of catch radius kind of scares me, but I think he could be more of a weapon this year, especially deep, or work with him underneath and let him use his speed. But I think just because we've seen Jefferson do it before, he's probably the safer bet to put as the potential number 2.
All right. Obviously, we will probably have both you guys on ahead of the 2024 season starting. But before training camp gets underway, when you look at this rookie class, top to bottom, at least where you sit right now, who would be your choice to end up winning the Joe Green award for Rookie of the Year on the team? Joe, I'll start with you.
Oh, this is a tough one. I think I'll go with Zach Frazier. Just because center position is so important in Pittsburgh, and if they can have some success running the ball up the middle, and he's kind of a guy that we've seen what he did in college. He's got a lot of experience, and I do like Troy Fautanu as well. But I think right now, if I'm making a prediction, that his role isn't as secure because he does have a little bit of competition. I'm not really sure how much of a real threat Dan Moore Jr. will be, but I do like Frazier, kind of as that anchor up the middle to kind of take over. And yeah, I think he's really a plug and play, can be one of the top centers in the league, at least top 15, top 10 as a rookie. So I would go with him as it stands right now. I mean, I wouldn't sleep on Peyton Wilson either, but I'm just not sure how much playing time he's going to get early in the season. Obviously, Joey Porter Jr. won the award last year, didn't get a ton of playing time early in the season either, but I think Frazier's probably the safer bet right now, and I do think he's going to have an impressive rookie season.
All right, we'll give you an opportunity maybe to stick with that or go a different direction come the start of the season. Ross, how about you? What's your best bet for Rookie of the Year as you sit here ahead of training camp getting underway?
Yeah, so the last time a lineman won the Joe Green Award was 2012 with Mike Adams, and the year before him was Marcus Gilbert, both tackles there. So it's been, over a decade since a lineman has won the award. It seems like the, skill position players tend to maybe draw a little bit more favor in that voting process. Just, they're maybe a little more exciting, a little bit more visibility on them with what they're doing on the field, more talked about in general. So I'm leaning towards one of the Wilsons, Roman Wilson or Peyton Wilson. I lean towards Peyton Wilson. I think, he has 15 sacks throughout his time in college, I believe is that number. And that was the 4th or 5th most in college football since 2020. And so I think he could put up some splashy plays where, he's making some key sacks, or he's forcing maybe a fumble back there and a sack fumble. If he's playing in dime defense, you could, maybe see an interception or maybe 2 if things break the right way for him. And so I could see Peyton Wilson ending up with the Joe Green Award.
I tell you, the deeper you get into the tape with this class and all, I mean, look, there's reasons to get excited about each and every one of these picks. But, man, Peyton Wilson, you just wonder, man, if he can get on the field for whatever reason earlier rather than later. And obviously the caveat of him staying healthy, the big thing that's been attached to him, since he was obviously through the pre-draft process and beyond. To me, he is the guy that has the most upside excitement kind of related to him at this point of the offseason. So I'm really, really interested to see how this pans out for him. I would not be shocked if he won the Rookie of the Year award. But once again, I think it would involve him having to get on the field maybe sooner rather than later. I think in so many words, that's what Joe had to say there. All right, starting to wind this down now. You guys have worked together quite a bit on the Depot Dive. I think you two obviously spent time in Indianapolis, right, at the Combine. So you've got to know each other a little bit more, over the last couple months. Ross, what's one thing about Joe that people would probably like to learn about him?
Yeah, I found out in Indianapolis, this Joe watches any and every sport you can possibly imagine. I was shocked to learn. I mean, we're talking golf, we're talking racing, we're talking anything with competition. Joe is tuning in, which, I tend to stick pretty much just to football, a little bit of baseball, a little bit of hockey. But Joe is locked in on pretty much every sport and knows a whole lot about it. He's not just watching. He knows a whole lot about each of these sports, and so that was impressive to me.
You got any dirt on him?
Do I? I don't think so. I'd have to think about that.
All right, Joe. What's one thing you've learned about Ross? From the combine and doing several shows at the Depot Dive.
Yeah, no dirt. I would say Ross is just kind of good at like everything. Like I'm very niche in the things I'm good at. Like I'm so technologically inept. I'm not like handy, but like Ross is a wizard with technology. He's got a music background. He's good with all that. He's a great writer. Just kind of like a Renaissance man. He can kind of do it all. So it's been fun to get to know him and kind of learn more about him. Hoping we can make a return trip to Indianapolis this season because that was definitely a lot of fun last year. So something to be enjoy.
You guys are too buttoned up. I got to loosen you up some. What in my time spending time with you guys in Nashville and Boston, what's maybe and feel free to sling some dirt. What's one thing that you learned about me spending time with me in the early winter? Joe,
the lengths you would go to get a Diet Mountain Dew.
I like my caffeine. That's for sure. Anything else, Joe, that maybe you learned about me?
No, I mean, we had met before too, so
right.
It wasn't nothing really too surprising, I guess, for mine. Just with the multiple stops for the Diet Mountain Dew were pretty fun. That was a fun track to try to find some.
All right. How about you, Ross?
I forgot about the Mountain Dew thing, but yeah, I just found it so funny. You showed up and I'm like, do you need water or anything? And out of your Marlboro jacket that you have, which is sweet, by the way, comes 2 Diet Mountain Dews out of the pockets. And I thought that was just hilarious. But another thing, there was something. Oh, I found out that you're a very charitable guy because when I was driving you back to your hotel, this is kind of maybe confusing to explain, but I had a phone case that acted as a wallet, and I switched just right before Dave got into town to actually having a standalone wallet again. And I had forgotten it on our trip there, and I was running embarrassingly low on fuel. And we got to the gas station. I realized I had no money, and I'm like, "Oh no, this is my first time one of my first times meeting Dave, and I'm gonna have to ask him for some gas money." And so you were very nice about that.
I don't even think I asked you to pay that back to me, did I?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I had a great time with both you guys. All right. Anything else you guys would like to end with here before we start wrapping this up? Anything on either one of your minds?
I think, we're just looking forward to getting into the flow of the season, especially with the Depot Dive, launching it during the, slower part of the off season, just kind of getting our feet underneath us on how to run a show. And, there's video involved. So trying to figure out the tech side of that and everything. I think we're to a spot now where we're comfortable. And so we're looking forward to you guys tuning into our podcast, whether it be on YouTube or Spotify, wherever you want to listen or watch. We, try and bring you guys good content every week. And so we hope you will tune in as the season and news starts to pick up.
And usually you guys keep that right around 30 minutes, whereas the Terrible Podcast can go anywhere from an hour to 2 hours and 15 minutes. Joe, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, no, just to echo Ross' sentiment, just check out the Depot Dive, call in. We have a voicemail box, answer some questions, and definitely excited for, the ramp up of the season so we can stop talking about, all these lists and just this dead period of the off season. Excited for some real football and some hard news and, see what's going down in the Trobe to talk about. So very, very excited for, the week ahead.
All right. Well, I couldn't be more proud of you guys, and I'm sort of glad that Alex needed a day off today because the big push this off season is to get the readers and the listeners to learn and know more about Ross and Joe. They are the new up and coming, or not really new or up and coming, but they are becoming more of the active face, I think, if you will, of Steelers Depot. No, Alex and I are not going anywhere, but trying to share the load a little bit more. So, hopefully by having those guys on today and more moving forward into, the start of the season and during the season, people that are longtime listeners. Look, a lot of people don't like change. They like things as is, and they don't like certain people sitting in. So I get all that, especially being as old and crotchery as I can be sometimes. But these are two good dudes, and I hope you listeners take time to learn more about them. Tune into the Depot Dive, read their work on SteelersDepot.com, and just become more familiar with with not only their work but who they are as people as well too. So Ross and Joe, I appreciate you guys sitting in for Alex today, and we'll obviously be having these guys on again. We are going to put off the you know what? Let's take a couple of questions. What the hell? We'll run a little bit long here. I'll let these guys answer the question today, or questions today. This one comes from Mike Brennan. Dear Dave and Alex, quick thank you for keeping this interesting over the last few weeks on your recent podcast. Really enjoyed the deep dive into the analytics and stats around the running backs and what to expect this year and comparing to the rest of the NFL. He went looking at the scatter plot, and it does speak 1,000 words. There are so many stats for just running backs. He says you went into talking about the O-line. I can't remember. He says, I can't remember recalling any stats when used when talking about the O-line. Do you have any preferred offensive line statistics for O-line players? Basically, I guess what the answer is, or what the question here is from Mike is, he liked the running back stats that we talked about recently. What do you guys kind of look? Do you guys have any particular offensive line statistics that you'd like to look at, Ross?
Yeah, I mean, in the pass game, obviously sacks allowed, pressures allowed, that kind of thing is important. But in the run game, something that doesn't get talked about as much because it's a little harder to measure, but and it's not necessarily attributed to one specific offensive lineman all the time, more of a unit stat. But yards before contact for a running back is an interesting one to look at. I think the Steelers struggled mightily in that area last year. Specifically, I know Najee Harris was very low in terms of league-wide rankings for running backs at, getting hit at or behind the line of scrimmage. And so that's an interesting one to look at for me.
All right, Joe, what about offensive line and stats?
Yeah, one thing I look at is if a team has a good run game, look at, where the percentage of their rush direction. Usually they're going to run behind their better blockers. And then I know on the defensive side of the ball, it's, obviously a controversial stat. I think on the offense, with offense linemen, it's a little bit more linear in terms of, pass block win rate and run block win rate. I think it's a little bit easier to calculate and kind of tells a better story on the offensive side of the ball than it does, when we're looking at the defensive side of the ball and you're looking at, the Myles Garrett versus TJ Watt comparisons, obviously the one that gets blown up. But those are two kind of, deeper, more analytical, I guess, focused stats that are I like to, kind of judge offensive linemen or units.
All right, this one's from Kevin Amaya from SoCal, Southern California. Hope all is well. Question today is about free agent wide receiver Michael Thomas. What do you guys think he can offer this offense if fully healthy and not burdened with the number one receiver role? Does his skill set work as the number two in this scheme? He says, I recall the Steelers having interest in him earlier in the offseason. I think he can circle back around like how Quan Alexander did last year. He makes sense to me due to pedigree, pass production, and hopefully cost. And from what I can recall, Arthur Smith's offense didn't really need a big name wide receiver to work in Tennessee. He says, I'm not in the camp of trading for a notable star since Steelers do so well drafting him. They also don't make incoming free agents among the highest paid on a team. What say you? Kevin, first and foremost, I just want to address, recall the Steelers having interest in him earlier in the offseason. I know there was some, kind of rumblings and maybe specu reporting and all like that. I'm not so sure, if the Steelers did pick up the phone to call Michael Thomas, I don't imagine that call was a very long one overall. But all that withstanding, what are your guys' thoughts on, a little bit older now, Michael Thomas had a little bit of injury history to him, still unsigned at this point. Where do you guys come in on him being a potential addition to this offense?
Yeah, I mean, I can see where the injury comes from, just given what he did kind of early in his career with the Saints. But I mean, he's only played in 20 games since the 2020 season, missed all of 2021, and he just hasn't been all that productive. I think if you bring him in at this point, even if he is healthy, I think the injury history has kind of taken a toll on him as well. So you're kind of looking at a guy that is pretty much in that same, sort of sphere as at this point, even Quez Watkins, Van Jefferson, and you got to deal with somebody that has had that, experience being that top guy, being a number one receiver, and he might still. Not saying this will be the case, but he might still kind of want to get his touches and kind of get that volume, and kind of be that clear-cut number two, which I'm just not sure he is good enough to be that guy at this point. He just, even when he's played the last few seasons, which is minimally, just hasn't been all that impressive. So I think it's probably a bit higher risk than reward at this point. I think if the Steelers do add a receiver, it will be somebody that is cut by another team. One name that I think Dave wrote about earlier this season that I keep coming back to maybe is a Robert Woods in that loaded Texans receiving room. If they're guys that they have and don't impress, that's a veteran guy that can kind of come in and give you a little something maybe as the number two. So I just don't think that Thomas is a move that they will make, and I'm just not sure how much it would really benefit them if they did make it.
Man, you're talking about a guy here, former NFL Offensive Player of the Year in 2019, two-time first-team All-Pro in 2018, 2019, three-time Pro Bowler. Ross, where do you come in on him at this point?
Yeah, I mean, the Steelers have, rolled the dice or kind of kicked the tires on some of these reclamation projects in the past, but with the injury history, only in the last 4 seasons, like Joe said, 20 games, 15 starts, only 95 receptions for 1,057 yards in that time, 4 touchdowns. I mean, is he really going to be better than what they have on the roster, or is he going to stay healthy? And what would they even bring him in for? What's his market value? I don't know what his last couple of contracts looked like with the Saints there, but I can't imagine the Steelers would want to bring him in for anything really over the veteran minimum. I don't know if he is looking for that. Maybe that is what he signed for with the Saints recently, but if he was wanting to come in for that cheap, you'd think the Steelers would have maybe done that already to try and get him in the flow of things with the team, and that hasn't happened. I don't see it happening.
Yeah, I mean, at 31 now, he's obviously not going to, he would, if he did come in on a veteran benefit contract, you're not going to get a guy that's going to play any special teams for you. So he'd almost have to outright be your number 2 or maybe your number 3 to kind of even justify holding on to a roster spot, because if he ended up like number 4 on that unit, and only played 5-6 plays a game, you're wasting essentially a roster spot that could go to somebody else that could probably give you the same amount of snaps and some special teams work to boot there. Look, I'm not going to say is unequivocally out of the question here for this team, but I kind of echo what Ross just said there. You would think that if they were more in line of adding a player like Michael Thomas and on a veteran benefit contract, which I really think would be his market value, if not just slightly more than that right now, something like that would have happened at this point. Now, obviously, injuries could happen during training camp, and it's a long summer still yet to go. Maybe they get in a situation where they have, where he becomes a lot more attractive at a little bit higher price. But I would. Once again, I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I think it would take a special circumstance, an unfortunate circumstance, for something like that to happen at this point. Let's take one more here from Bryce. Says, while we would all love to see a move made to bring in more solid second wide receiver, is it possible that in the Steelers' mind they're putting more emphasis on Arthur Smith being able to scheme up the current group with the tight ends included and basically create their own dynamic number 2 option? I don't know. This is from, it feels like me and Alex maybe already covered that one there. But anyway, thoughts on how the Steelers are handling this number 2 wide receiver spot right now?
Yeah, I'm okay with the wait and see approach. See what's going on at training camp. I mean, Russell Wilson, he was just seen working out with Scotty Miller and Quez Watkins, I think, over there in California. And, maybe one of those guys surprises a little bit in camp. I know Scotty Miller received some positive reports in terms of his connection with Russell Wilson throughout the spring. And then, I already talked about Calvin Austin III, and I think Roman Wilson has, I think Roman Wilson kind of fell out of people's favor because of a string of negative reports on him throughout the spring. But, the pads aren't on yet. He's a rookie in his first few practices. I think he can be more than what people are giving him credit for at the moment, even in his rookie season. I mean, you look at Deontay Johnson's rookie season, and I know there are different players coming out. Deontay was a little bit more refined and more used in a more pro style offense than the run first offense that Roman Wilson was in at Michigan. But yeah, I think the wait and see approach is probably best. And I agree, Arthur Smith probably can scheme up more. I tend to lean towards no significant, they might add a receiver at cut downs or something. But in terms of trading for a top guy, I'm kind of in the I'll believe it when I see it phase of things right now. So, yeah, I think Pat Freiermuth, filling in and kind of acting as the wide receiver 2 is kind of maybe what they're leaning on right now.
Joe, any thoughts on how the team's handled this so far?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would have liked to see them add somebody like one guy I had in my head that I would have liked to see them add was like a Josh Reynolds. If he was the Lions, he just signed with Denver. Like that sort of receiver, just somebody that has a little bit more of a pedigree that you can kind of put. But I think his market was probably a little bit more than they were willing to pay. So as it stands right now, yeah, I mean, I'm fine with it. It's a little bit worrisome. Given that it's just an unknown of who's going to be that other receiver. But I know Freiermuth healthy this season. We've seen him be productive before. I think Pickens is going to have a strong season, both Warren and Harris out of the backfield. So I think he can kind of mitigate the concerns a little bit. And I mean, we've seen around the league now too, like teams using their tight ends as their de facto number 2 or even, their number 1 receiving option. So I don't think it's, that much of an issue right now. Obviously, we'll see how training camp goes. If these guys, struggle to produce or can't really get it going, then it'll be obviously a much bigger problem. But as it stands right now, I'm okay with the wait and see approach and seeing what you can do with working the tight end and giving him a little more usage. And obviously, you have George Pickens who can really blossom and maybe take another step forward this season. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all works out. But I'm not super upset with the way they've done things so far.
Tacking something on to what Joe just said, there were 14 teams in the NFL last year where a tight end was the second leading receiver in terms of yards there. So I think, I wrote a post that maybe the wide receiver 2 needs being a little bit overblown because of that a couple of weeks ago. And it really isn't that uncommon for a tight end to kind of act as the second wide receiver. There's, a number of those teams that had a tight end as their second leading receiver, they're quote unquote wide receiver 2 or second wide receiver on their roster in terms of yards. Some of those guys were only getting 460 yards. I think the Kansas City Chiefs, their second leading receiver was Justin Watson, 460 yards. Obviously that's, well below what you would expect from a wide receiver 2, but they won the Super Bowl. So, teams can get it done without a, top level wide receiver 2.
All right, good info there. All right, guys, I appreciate you helping out with the email machine this week. We'll call it quits for this Tuesday episode of the Terrible Podcast. We will resume on Friday. Alex should be back in the main chair for that. So, but in the meantime, I appreciate Joe and Ross filling in on this episode. So in the meantime, you can follow me on Twitter at Steelers Depot, follow the show at Terrible Podcast, follow Alex at Alex_Kozora. It's easy to find both Josh and Ross on the Twitter machine as well too. So make sure you are following them. If not already, you can donate to the show, SteelersDepot.com. Hit the donate button up right, navigational bar. Also, if you'd like an ad-free version of the site, SteelersDepot.com. Hit the ad-free button. Follow the directions that way. So, until Friday, as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex, and today, Joe Clark and Ross McCorkle. Have a good day.